All right, everybody, get ready because we are going deep today on Chapter 11, Cryosphere.
Ooh, the cryosphere.
We're talking glacial and ice sheet dynamics, permafrost and snow cover, the whole 9 yards, sections 11.1, 11.2, and 11.3.
Really getting into it.
You might be thinking, okay, but is this really relevant to me? I don't live near a glacier.
Right. Get ready to have your mind blown because at the end of this, you will see that these frozen landscapes, they're way more connected to your life than you think.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. What happens in these, what may seem like far-off places, actually have impacts all across the world.
Yeah.
They impact sea levels, weather patterns,
The air we breathe.
everything.
Yeah, so let's start with the big picture here.
Good.
Glaciers and ice sheets, kind of the poster children for climate change. But I have to admit, sometimes the science feels a bit abstract.
Yeah.
Can you just break it down for us?
Yeah.
What's happening and why should we be paying attention?
Well, you can imagine a giant freezer slowly defrosting.
That's kind of what's happening to all the ice on the planet. Over 90% of glaciers worldwide are shrinking.
Wow.
And it's happening at a rate faster than anything that we've ever seen before.
And we're not just talking about the poles.
Right. We're talking about everywhere. Himalayas, Alps, the Rockies.
Yeah.
All of them.
Losing ice at an alarming rate.
Yeah.
Okay, so ice is melting. Is that really a big deal, though? Isn't it just part of natural cycles?
Well, here's where it gets concerning.
Okay.
This melting is directly linked to co-Euro levels in the atmosphere. Yeah. And before the Industrial Revolution, co-Euro levels were around 280 parts per million.
Okay.
Now it's over 419.
Wow.
So all that extra co-Euro is like a heat-trapping blanket.
Okay.
It warms the planet and speeds up the melting of the ice.
So more co-Euros equals a warmer planet, which means faster ice melt.
Exactly.
Yeah. But how does that affect me? Personally?
Well, think of it this way. Glaciers and ice sheets are like giant water towers.
Okay.
They hold tons and tons of fresh water,
Right.
which gradually melts and feeds the rivers and provides us with water for drinking, agriculture, hydropower.
Right.
And as they shrink, we lose that reliable water source.
Okay, so that's starting to hit a little closer to home now.
Yeah.
And I remember reading about those massive ice sheets in Greenland and Antarctica,
right,
being particularly vulnerable. So
yeah.
what's going on over there?
Well, Greenland's ice loss has actually doubled in the past 20 years.
Wow.
And to put that into perspective, if all of Greenland's ice melted, it would raise sea level by over 20 feet.
20 feet. That's hard to even imagine. It's like picturing every coastal city underwater.
Right.
But you said even a small increase can be a problem.
Yeah.
So, can you give us an example?
Well, rising sea levels lead to things like increased coastal erosion,
right,
saltwater intrusion into freshwater,
right,
and much more frequent and severe flooding. All of that damages infrastructure, it damages property, displaces communities, ecosystems, which leads to economic loss and humanitarian crises.
So it's not just about, polar bears losing their habitat.
Right.
It's about people losing their homes and their livelihoods.
Exactly.
And I've also heard about this really unstable part of the West Antarctic ice sheet that has scientists worried.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that?
You're talking about Thwaites Glacier.
Yeah.
Which is often nicknamed the Doomsday Glacier.
Doomsday Glacier. That's not a very reassuring name.
No, it's not.
So what's the story with that?
Well, warmer ocean water is melting it from below.
Okay.
And if it collapses, it could trigger a cascade of melting in the surrounding glaciers.
Okay.
Which would raise the global sea level by several feet.
Wow, Doomsday Glacier. What are the chances of that actually happening?
Well, it's hard to predict with certainty.
Right.
But research suggests that it's losing ice at an accelerating rate.
Okay.
Some scientists think it could happen within the next few decades.
Wow.
Others think it might take centuries.
Okay.
But one thing is certain, the warmer the planet gets, the greater the risk.
Okay, so we've covered glaciers and ice sheets.
Right.
Now let's move on to permafrost.
Okay.
Which I'll admit I don't know much about.
Permafrost is ground that's been frozen for at least 2 years.
Okay.
And it's not just found in polar regions.
No.
It actually underlies about a quarter of the northern hemisphere's landmass.
Really? I had no idea it was that widespread.
Yeah, it's pretty much everywhere.
So what's the big deal if it thaws?
Well, permafrost contains huge amounts of organic matter,
Okay.
dead plants, animals that have been frozen for centuries.
Okay.
As it thaws, This matter decomposes and it releases methane and co-Euro into the atmosphere.
So it's like this giant underground carbon vault
Exactly.
that's slowly unlocking,
Yeah.
releasing these greenhouse gases.
Right. And here's the kicker.
Okay.
Methane is a way more potent greenhouse gas than co-Euro.
Mm.
It traps heat much more effectively. So thawing permafrost not only releases massive amounts of carbon,
Yeah.
it also accelerates global warming, creating a vicious cycle.
Okay, so bad for the climate.
Yeah.
But what about the people who live in those regions?
Right.
What are the impacts for them?
Well, imagine the ground beneath your house slowly turning to mud.
Yeah.
That's the reality for many people living in permafrost regions.
Oh, wow.
So thawing permafrost causes the ground to become unstable,
Right.
leading to the damage and collapse of buildings, roads, other infrastructure.
That's terrifying.
Yeah.
Are there any other consequences of permafrost thawing that we haven't even talked about yet?
Well, as it thaws, it can release harmful contaminants like mercury
Oh, wow.
and other heavy metals that have been trapped in the frozen ground for centuries.
Okay.
And this contaminates water sources, poses a
Mhm.
risk to human health and ecosystems.
Wow, so many different consequences.
It also creates what are called thermokarst lakes,
Thermokarst lakes.
which are basically depressions that fill up with water. As the permafrost thaws,
Right.
and these lakes can release methane as well.
It's like a multifaceted problem
Right.
with all these cascading consequences.
Exactly.
And I imagine it's especially challenging for indigenous communities that rely on these landscapes for their traditional ways of life.
Absolutely. They're on the front lines of climate change.
Yeah.
They experience the most immediate and severe impacts of all of this.
This is all pretty heavy stuff.
Yeah.
Before we move on to the polar regions and their global impact,
Okay.
is there anything else about permafrost that you think our listeners should know?
I think one important thing to remember is that this isn't just a problem for the future.
Right.
It's happening now.
Yeah.
The rate of thawing is accelerating, making it even more crucial to address climate change and mitigate its impact.
Right. We can't just wait.
Exactly.
We have to act now.
We do. It really is happening right now in front of us, these changes, and it's a reminder that everything is interconnected on the planet. And speaking of interconnectedness, let's move on to the polar regions.
Okay.
You know, those icy landscapes at the top and bottom of the world.
Yeah.
They might seem remote and desolate, but they play a really critical role in regulating the Earth's climate.
I've always been fascinated by the polar regions. They just seem so, I don't know, otherworldly, but I have to admit, I really don't understand how they affect my life. Like here,
Right.
host speaker's general location, example, in the city.
Well, think of the polar regions as the Earth's air conditioner.
Okay.
The vast expanses of ice and snow reflect sunlight back into space,
Right.
which helps to regulate the planet's temperature.
Okay.
But as those icy regions warm and melt, they reflect less sunlight,
Okay.
which leads to more warming. It's a vicious cycle.
So it's like the Earth's thermostat is getting cranked up,
Exactly.
and the polar regions are kind of the first ones to feel it.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
But how does that translate into like real world impacts
Right.
for the rest of us?
Well, the Arctic, for instance, it's
God.
warming at least twice the rate of the rest of the planet.
Wow.
And this phenomenon is called Arctic amplification.
Arctic amplification.
And it's basically disrupting weather patterns across the globe.
Okay.
So, for example, the jet stream, that powerful river of wind that kind of steers weather systems around,
Yeah.
it's becoming wavier and more erratic,
Mm.
which leads to more extreme weather events.
So like those heat waves that we had last summer, the flooding, all that
Exactly.
could be linked to changes in the Arctic.
It's a definite possibility.
Wow.
Scientists are finding more and more evidence that Arctic warming is playing a role in these events.
Mm.
And it's not just the Arctic that's impacting global weather patterns.
Okay.
Antarctica, with its massive ice sheets and its complex ocean currents, it also plays a role.
Speaking of Antarctica, I remember reading that changes in the ice dynamics there can disrupt ocean currents.
Right.
Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, so imagine the ocean as this giant conveyor belt that's constantly moving water around the globe.
Okay.
The melting of Antarctic ice sheets can disrupt this circulation
Okay.
because it's adding huge amounts of fresh water into the system.
Right.
And that can affect ocean currents, change weather patterns,
Mm.
and even impact marine ecosystems.
Wow. It's like a domino effect.
Right.
One change triggers another, and the impacts just ripple outward across the whole planet.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot to take in.
It is.
But amidst all this talk of melting ice and disrupted weather patterns, is there I don't know, any good news?
Right.
Are there any signs of hope?
Well, I don't want to downplay the seriousness of the situation,
Right.
but I'm not a pessimist either.
Go.
There are some remarkable examples of international cooperation happening right now,
Okay.
and it demonstrates that we can come together to address these global challenges.
Okay. Tell me about these glimmers of hope.
Okay, so one inspiring example is the Arctic Council.
Okay.
And it's an intergovernmental forum that brings together the 8 Arctic states, along with representatives from indigenous communities.
Okay.
And they come together to address issues of sustainable development and
Wow.
environmental protection in the Arctic.
That's pretty impressive considering, all the geopolitical tension we see in other parts of the world.
Right.
What kind of work does the Arctic Council actually do?
They work on a wide range of issues, from climate change mitigation and adaptation to biodiversity conservation, pollution prevention, sustainable economic development, you name it.
Wow.
And they promote scientific research, they share knowledge, they share best practices, and they work towards collaborative solutions.
So it's not just talk, they're actually doing stuff.
Exactly, it's action-oriented.
Are there any other examples of this kind of international cooperation?
Absolutely. The Antarctic Treaty System,
Okay.
established in 1959,
Yeah.
designated Antarctica as a continent for peace and science.
Okay.
So it prohibits military activity, it promotes scientific cooperation, and it sets aside all these territorial claims.
Hmm.
So these nations can work together to study and protect this really unique environment.
It's amazing to think that during the Cold War,
Right.
nations could put aside their differences and agree to protect Antarctica.
It is pretty remarkable.
Gives me hope that we can do the same for other parts of the world.
Right.
So we've talked about all these alarming changes happening in the cryosphere, the melting glaciers, the ice sheets, thawing permafrost, disrupted weather patterns, but we've also highlighted some, I guess you could say, inspiring examples of international cooperation.
Right.
So it feels like we're at a critical point.
Yeah.
Like we need to decide what kind of future we want.
Exactly. We have a choice.
Right.
We can continue down the path of inaction
Yeah.
and face the consequences,
Uh-huh.
or we choose a different path,
Right.
one that embraces sustainability and innovation and collective action.
It's clear that protecting the cryosphere isn't just about, saving polar bears and penguins.
Right.
It's about safeguarding the future of our planet.
Exactly.
For all of us.
For everybody.
Yeah, but what can we as individuals actually do to make a difference?
Well, that's a big question.
Yeah.
It's kind of a lot to process, all this information.
Yeah.
But I think, something that really sticks with me is how we often think of the cryosphere as this distant, pristine wilderness.
Right.
But the reality is it's deeply interconnected with our lives.
Mm.
And in so many ways, whether it's the water we drink, the food we eat, or the air we breathe, we depend on these frozen landscapes more than we realize, I think.
It's easy to forget
It is.
that we're not separate from nature.
Right.
We are a part of it.
We are, and our actions have consequences.
Right, both for ourselves and for the planet.
Exactly. But, the good news is we also have the power to make a difference.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be some grand sweeping gesture.
Right.
It can start with those simple everyday choices.
So, what can our listeners do to help protect the cryosphere, knowing its impact is so much bigger than just those icy regions?
Well, we can all strive to reduce our carbon footprint,
Okay.
like finding ways to use less energy at home,
Yeah.
opting for public transportation or cycling,
Right.
and making conscious choices about the products we buy.
Okay, those are great individual actions.
Yeah.
But what about on a larger scale?
Yeah.
Is there anything we can do to kind of advocate for systemic change?
Absolutely. We can support policies that promote renewable energy, invest in energy efficiency, and protect natural environments.
Right.
Get involved with our elected officials, join organizations that are working on climate action,
Yeah.
use our voices to advocate for a more sustainable future.
It sounds like it's a combination of individual actions and those collective efforts, working together.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think knowledge is a powerful tool.
Absolutely.
The more we understand about the cryosphere and its role, the better equipped we are to make those informed decisions and take action.
I completely agree. Knowledge is the foundation for change.
Yeah.
And resources like the IPCC reports, NOAA's website, organizations like the World Wildlife Fund offer a wealth of information on this topic.
For sure. And this deep dive has certainly been eye-opening for me.
Mm.
It's definitely a call to action,
Yeah,
but also a reminder of the beauty and importance of these frozen landscapes.
it is.
What's one thing you hope our listeners take away from this conversation?
Well, I hope they come away with a sense of wonder, a renewed appreciation for this interconnectedness.
Yeah.
The cryosphere might seem far away, but its fate is tied to our own.
Right.
And by understanding the challenges,
Yeah.
embracing solutions, we can shape a more sustainable and just future.
Well said.
Thank you.
To our listeners, we hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and empowered you to learn more about the cryosphere and its role in our planet.
Absolutely.
Remember, knowledge is power.
Yes.
Selective action is key.
It is.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
I like that. Very good.